Hello, this is Crystal Swinger, Cabarrus Health Alliance. Just want to give a presentation today about the sanitation inspection, specifically the kitchen portion, and how that affects the staff and any kind of volunteers or cook that work in there on a daily basis. So we will go through the rules in the 2800. You can read them verbatim. We're going to go over some topics one by one and discuss those. And just keep in mind that these daycare rules apply to small centers in a home, maybe 13 or more children, all the way up to very large centers and after schoolers, things like that. So a lot of these topics may pertain to you or they may not. But the number one thing to remember is hand washing. That is the takeaway message for today's presentation is, if you do nothing else, wash your hands correctly and often. It is the number one defense against spreading diseases, viruses, bacteria, just name the sickness. You can prevent it by washing your hands properly. So when is it expected of you to wash hands? And that's when you arrive. I don't know anyone that's smoking, but if you were to smoke outside, when you come in after that, you'd wash your hands every time. Before handling food or clean utensils, or at the end of the day, if you've taken out the trash and you've mopped up and you forgot to put away the colander, you would wash your hands before you touch that clean colander and put that away. The two important ones to remember, and that I see most often misused, is wearing gloves and either trying to wash the gloves underneath the hand sink or taking off the gloves, wearing them all day, and then washing your hands one time. Hand washing is not precluded by the use of gloves. Gloves are not required, but if you want to wear them, that's perfectly fine. But you still have to wash your hands at the appropriate times. So if you've worn gloves and you've handled taking out the trash and you come back in and you take off your gloves, you still have to wash your hands before you start touching food or clean utensils, even though you've changed gloves. The important one also to remember is between handling raw foods and ready-to-eat foods. So sometimes you'll see ready-to-eat abbreviated as RTE, ready-to-eat foods, and that's anything that can be directly just put into your mouth and eaten and is safe. So any of the fruits or yogurts or anything that you can pull straight out of the fridge or off the counter and eat, we need to really separate those from anything that's raw, which would include raw shell eggs. Those fall into the raw meats category because the shell eggs can contain salmonella. So we want to keep that over with the raw beef, raw chicken, raw pork, all of that over, completely separated from the ready-to-eat foods. And we're also going to wash our hands in the kitchen hand sink itself. So even if you go to the bathroom, wash your hands in the bathroom, and you come out, when you get into the kitchen, you have to wash your hands in the kitchen hand sink. The single sink by itself, not the 3-compartment. Wash your hands there, soap and towels have to be at each of that station there. And so that's any kind of volunteer or assistant or substitute or someone just coming in to lend you a hand, they have to wash their hands in that hand sink. So we wet the hands, we get soap, we scrub it for 15 seconds at least and rinse it. And please remember, when you're turning off the faucet, either use your elbows, or if it's a step faucet, that is very helpful. Or you take the paper towel and you use the paper towel to turn on the faucets, because you've turned on the faucets with dirty hands. So now that you wash them, you want to maintain them being clean, so you use the paper towel or your elbows to shut off the faucets and throw the paper towel away, and your hands are completely clean now. All right, so this is critical for the cook, because anyone in the kitchen is handling and serving and preparing food for the entire daycare center. So if something happens where something is contaminated, then it affects every single room and every single child that food goes out to. Food supplies, where your food comes from. If it comes from a grocery store or from a restaurant, then those are approved sources, because both of those are either permitted or inspected by the health department or the Department of Ag. It's not something you can just buy cheap meat out of somebody's trunk on the side of the road, or from food banks, or if someone gives you a donation of food that is unmarked or the label has fallen off, you cannot use those type of items because there's no way to trace where that came from, or the date, or even like the ingredients or the type that it is. Make a note here of dented cans. If they come in or you purchase cans and the sides are dented, just make sure it's not severe. A little dent is okay, but what you really want to look for is the circular seal on the top and on the bottom is the very important part. So if that is dented, then that's going to really compromise the integrity of your can, because canning sucks the air out at a high temperature and seals it in, and that's what keeps the food preserved. So if that gets dented and any air can come in, then that's where we find botulism toxin begin to grow in that, and that's very deadly and very dangerous for children. So as long as that seal is intact, that's the important part that you want to look for. And if it ever comes in on delivery and it's too dented, just send it back with your food provider at that time. You can use vegetables children have grown in the center, out into the gardens, in the classrooms, tomato plants, whatever it is they want to grow. That's fine. Take it to the kitchen, wash it, and you can serve it, and they can eat it, or they can send it home. That's an approved source. Food for parties. Down there you'll see non-potentially hazardous, which is pH, potentially hazardous. There is a specific definition for what is potentially hazardous, but really it's anything that doesn't require refrigeration. That's a loose definition for you, but anything that you can sit out, brownies, cupcakes, cookies, those are all fine. Those can be brought from home into the classroom. So nothing like lemon meringue pie or chocolate pudding or anything like that. That's not allowed. All right, catered meals. So for you facilities that are having meals catered in, either from a restaurant or another center, it has to be approved, and that will go through the process of like plan review, and everyone's using a approved facility for that. But temperatures have to be maintained. This is the big one. If it's coming from another place and they are providing the transportation to you, when you receive it at your center, you have to verify that that temperature is correct and at the correct holding temperatures. And we'll list all of those a little bit later. But that's really what you use your thermometer for. It's not just to take water temperatures once every 6 months. You have to make sure that that food has been maintained at a proper temperature so that bacteria has not grown or it's not been mishandled, the food, and you're receiving it in its wholesome state. And this also applies to milk cartons too. If you want to go cold, you receive the milk and it feels like it's 60 degrees, then that's something that you reject. You don't take that, you don't pay for that. That's not something that you are taking as wholesome food to serve to your children. So if you are catering meals, please keep in mind that you need a backup plan if something were to happen to your caterer, if he can't make it or the food is not right or something happens, just a backup plan of where you're going to get food to serve your children. All right, lunches from home, they have to be identified of what child brought it, and refrigerated if it's not potentially hazardous. A lot of times if you're doing mass amounts of lunches from home, you're just going to put all the lunches in a refrigerator because no one's going to stand there and look in every single bag and determine what is potentially hazardous and what is not. And what you don't want is something that should be like yogurt or ranch or turkey or cheese or something like that that's been left out all day in the child's cubby. So put it in the refrigerator. If there is something that needs to be heated, the parent can direct you to do that. You do not have to meet the reheating temperatures. We'll talk about temperatures a little bit later. But they can just instruct you to warm it up for them. And that's perfectly fine. You don't have to hit a certain temperature. So preparing food. When you're working in the kitchen, you really want to use the least amount of manual bare hand contact. Like I said, we don't require gloves in the kitchen for daycares at this time. So really using your tongs, your spatulas, a spoon, just as much as possible, just so cut down on cross-contamination with your hands itself. So being aware of cross-contamination itself, what is that? Well, that's if you have a surface, a cutting board, let's say, and you've cut raw beef on there, or mixed up ground beef, and you've put it into, or pattied hamburgers, and you've put that out, and you've washed your hands. Well, you come back and you start cutting apples. Well, you're cutting apples on the same surface that you've cut that raw beef. So even if you rinse it off, that's not going to kill the bacteria that's on the beef itself that's now in your cutting board. So that is cross-contamination, is keeping separate your raw foods and your ready-to-eat foods, and that's by utensils. You don't use the same utensils for that, the same surfaces, cutting board. You could have two different ones, or two different complete table areas that you use for raw foods and for ready-to-eat foods. So anytime you are thawing something out from the freezer, there's proper ways to do this. The best way is to take it out a couple days earlier and put it into the refrigerator. So when you need it, it's completely thawed out, but it's kept under temperature the entire time. If you need it earlier than that, you can run it under the water in the prep sink, but you can't just turn it on and soak it in a tub. You have to have continuous running water over whatever it is that you're thawing out. You can also microwave it or as part of the cooking process, but what you cannot do is leave it out on the counter for any amount of time. If it's sitting there and it's 15 minutes before you're going to start using it, and you've just put it out so you can see it, then that's fine, but it cannot stay out like hours at a time, or that morning, or definitely not the next day to be used. So food cooking temperatures. I just want to talk about thermometers themselves. I don't think they're used as much as they really should be, and maybe that's because it's not really clear when or how to use a thermometer and how to calibrate them. So we're going to talk a little bit about thermometers right here. We've got the digital thermometer, which once a battery goes dead, you just replace it. I think it's like a little watch battery, and it's completely calibrated within itself. Right, and then you've got the dial stem, so this red needle that goes all the way around. And what you should have in your kitchen is not what's seen here. You should have a 0 to 220 degree dial, which is what you want in there at any kind of hardware store, grocery store, Sam's, Walmart. I've seen them everywhere. They're not hard to find. So what we want to do is make sure that this is reading correctly. So we know that the digital is, but the dials, sometimes they can get off, because what it is, it's a bimetallic stem thermometer. So down this little stem, inside here are two pieces of thin metal. And what happens is this little dimple right here on the back end, that's where the temperature is actually read. So if you're sticking something underwater or food and it's only going in just at the tip, you're not reading the correct temperature. You want to stick it all the way into this dimple, and that's what's read. And those either contract, those little metal pieces, or they expand. And either way turns the dial one way or the other. Okay. Well, sometimes this gets out of whack because it's been used, or temperature within the kitchen, whatever the case may be. So we're going to talk about how to calibrate it, which means bringing it back right to where you know it's reading correctly. So usually you have two different cases. Here's a blue one here, and it's got like a little parentheses at the end here, and then there's a different end that pulls up all the way to the top, and it's got a hole right here. So at the back of your thermometer is a hex nut, 6-sided nut that goes on right here. So you stick the thermometer through this hole till this fits into the hex nut. Okay, and this can go to the same thing. This stem fits all the way through this way, and that hex nut fits right in there. So you take a glass of water and you fill it all the way with ice and then a little bit of water, so that this dimple right there goes into the cold water. And we know that ice freezes at 32 degrees, or water freezes to make ice. So we want to know what temperature you have. So let it sit in there, and wherever it stops, it should be at 32 degrees. And if it is, then you know your calibrated thermometer is reading correctly. But if it does not, how do we fix that? Well, you hold your thermometer very still, and you turn the lever, either the blue or the red, and it'll turn this hex nut. And if you don't have a cover at all, you can use pliers. That's been done. It's just as easy. And you make it read 32 degrees. So you turn that hex nut until the needle reads 32 degrees. And now your thermometer is calibrated and you know that it's reading correctly. Okay? So that's how those are used. All right, so food cooking temperatures. When you're cooking from raw meat, so a lot of times your food does come in already cooked, but it's frozen, you just have to warm it up, then that's fine. You can just follow the directions and none of this pertains to you. But if you're cooking from a raw source of food, these are the different temperatures that you need to cook the food to. So if you've got cheeseburgers or meatloaf, or a pork loin, it's got to be this, 155, 150, 130, 165 for any kind of chicken at your end temperature. So stick your thermometer in there. Yes, it reads 155. Okay, it's killed all of the bacteria that can be in that ground beef at that temperature. And they have different temperatures because these are all from different animals. So the bacteria in the different animals' muscles are not the same across the board. They're either different bacteria or they can live or die at a different range. So a lot of the food science goes into what temperatures these are and how long to cook them at those temperatures. So if you're doing any kind of batch microwave cooking, you have to add 25 degrees to any of these temperatures here for your end result, just because microwave is very uneven in its temperature settings. Okay, so you have to rotate it, and I don't know anyone that's really cooking whole food into a microwave, but if you do, that's how you do it. All right, so reheating food. So this only pertains to daycare kitchens that have commercial grade equipment, and they are heating like a large stock pot of green beans, and half of that goes out to the classrooms, and you have a half of the pot left. Well, it's hot. You have to cool that down, put it in the refrigerator or the freezer, and if you want to use it the next day, reheating it back up has to go up to 165. Okay, so not the 140, but all the way up to 165 and heating. And just because you've gone through the heating process, the cooling process, and back into the heating, so that's why you really have to be careful in making sure that we get all of that. If there's any kind of newly introduced bacteria, we want to kill that. So 165 for all food. So even if you've cooked beef at 155, if you're reheating that for the next day, then it has to go up to 165. Okay, that's an important part. All right, so cold food storage, and we'll go into hot food storage as well, but if you look at that thermometer there, all the refrigerators have to be 45 degrees or below. Okay, so 45 degrees or below is where you want to keep all your foods, whether it's baby bottles or what you have prepared for lunch. In the center right there, from 45 degrees up on the thermometer all the way through to 139 degrees in that little bacteria guy, that is where bacteria grow. So anything greater than 45 degrees, 60, 80, 100, 120, all the way up to 140 degrees, bacteria really grow during those temperatures. So that's why we don't leave things out on the countertop at room temperature. That's why we want to make sure the food gets hot enough if we're going to cook it raw. And we want to make sure that our food gets cold enough too. If we have it in the refrigerator, but our refrigerator is only 50 degrees, well, we're not stopping or slowing that bacteria growth. They're being able to multiply endlessly. So that's why that's an important part of your refrigeration and of your cooking process. Okay. So in the refrigerator itself, we want to make sure that the shelves are clean. If it has any kind of coating on the chrome, you want to make sure that that's intact and not rusting off or flaking and falling down into food. We want to look for the grate that's in the back of the refrigerator that turns to keep the air circulated. Make sure that that is not dusty. And here's our cross-contamination again. We want to make sure all the raw meats and the shell eggs are stored on the very bottom shelf. We do not want raw beef thawing above the apples that we've cut out for snack and any of that blood dripping down onto them. put the shell eggs, put the meat on the bottom shelf. You can put it in a pan on the bottom shelf, but keep it away and not above anything else in that refrigerator. And anything sent from home needs to be labeled. If it's a bulk container, like any kind of soy milk or almond milk or whatever, all the milks, different milks that are out there, just have the child's name on there, because it has a expiration date or a goodbye date on there, but you're going to know that those kids are going to go through those milks before they expire. But just make sure that it's labeled so we know who it goes to. All right, so when you have large quantities of food, and if you are one of those centers that can cool food and are allowed to do that, you have to do it properly. If you have a gigantic stock pot full of chili, you can't just put that whole thing in the refrigerator. There's no way that air circulation in there can cool all of that chili down, especially in the center of it, to get below that 45 degrees. So a couple methods you can do is pour that out into shallow pans, maybe several of them, and kind of alternate stacking so they can all get air circulated on the top and through the bottom there. You can do an ice bath, which is, you can get an ice paddle, which is official, but you fill it up, it's like a freezer cold pack, and then you put it in the food itself, and it kind of cools it from the inside out. But I've also seen if you have clean new Ziploc bags and you put the ice in there and seal it up, you can put that in the center as well. You can do flash freeze. You can put it in the freezer maybe for 20-30 minutes, and that's going to cool it down really quickly, and then put it into the refrigerator, so you're starting at a lower temperature to bring that down to under 45 degrees. Just make sure we're not putting a sealed lid on things that are hot. You don't have to. You can put a lid on it, but not push it down. You want to let that hot steam come out. So we need to vent it just a little bit. And going back to that big stock pot of chili, we want to make sure that it cools quickly. So 140, we're cooling it through that danger section, right, from 45 to 140 degrees. We're cooling it through there, so we want to get it through that dangerous time where the bacteria are growing as fast as possible. So from 140, within 2 hours, if you come back, it should be 70 degrees. In the next 4 hours, it should be 45 degrees. So if you're putting that big chili in there, and it is 2 o'clock, and you come in the next morning at 7 o'clock, and it's still like 50-60 degrees, you cannot use that chili. It's been multiplying bacteria all night. So that's the important part of trying to get that temperature down as quick as possible. Hot storage. So just remember that this is storage. It's not for food that you're ready to serve. Okay, so this is hot storage, like in a cafeteria, a school cafeteria that they have like the hot buffet line the kids go through. That's hot storage. They're holding that food hot before it's being served onto the kids' plates. Okay, so we need to use the thermometer. So 140 degrees is what we need to be maintained. So if you need to hold it, like make it early and hold it until you're ready to use it an hour, hour and a half later, then you need to maintain that at 140 degrees. And also know that during field trips, you still need to maintain that temperature. So making sure you have enough cold packs in there if you've got potentially hazardous food, and throw a thermometer in there and make sure that it's down to 45 degrees before we handle those food out to those kids. Dry food storage. So anytime we're going to open a container, it needs to be in a steel container. We just can't have open bag of food. For protection of the food and also for insect deterrent. And you can't just roll it down, maybe tape or, cling wrap is fine. If it's all cling wrapped up in a very tight steel container, that's fine. Ziplocs are fine. Multi-use kind of storage containers are fine. And the only time you have to label it if it's not readily identifiable, which means anything like sugar or flour or grits. Really, some of those look the same as some laundry detergents, and people they don't tend to keep those in the same place, but you need to know what it is. Cheerios, okay, we all know what that looks like. Fruit Loops, brown sugar, that type of thing. It's really those white fine powders that we need to identify. So no food and no containers and nothing that we're using for food service can be kept under sewer lines. And this is sometimes seen in the classrooms themselves if they want to store their cups or their plates or some utensils or something underneath the sinks in their classrooms. They cannot do that. It needs to be out from underneath those sewer lines. So just make sure that you also, as well, in your kitchen under the 3-compartment sink are not storing utensils that we're using. We don't want any of the condensation from that sewer pipe to drip down on food, especially, or utensils that we're going to potentially use. You cannot store food in laundry rooms or bathrooms. Even the bulk containers that you get, maybe it's too large to fit in your kitchen, and you want to throw it into the laundry room. Really, that's not the place to be storing food. Grocery bags, any kind of grocery bag from like Walmart or Food Lion, those are not direct food contact items. So like if you that's how you get your apples from the grocery store, and you come back and you wash your apples, don't put them back into that same grocery bag because that was dirty, and now you've cleaned your apples and you're putting them back into a dirty bag. So you can put it into a Ziploc, you can put it into a glass bowl, plastic bowl, something like that, but not back into those bags. So you can put things like yogurt, little containers of yogurt, into a plastic bag like that and put it into the refrigerator, but it can't have direct contact with food itself. And this came out earlier, but just note that any kind of hazards that are in the kitchen, and this is really specific to cleaners, bleach, detergents, anything like that, need to be stored underneath the 3-compartment sink or in a locked storage cabinet by itself. So you can't just lock the kitchen door and say that that is locking the hazards, because we're not required to lock the kitchen door. So you have to have a specific closet or laundry room or area, something that can be locked by itself. So food serving, now we've gone through the preparation, now we're going to serve food. But we want to make sure that how the food is being prepared with ourselves. So looking in, clothes should be clean. There shouldn't be a lot of mud splashed on from where you've walked in, through the yard to get there. Clean apron, and fingernails should be clean, like underneath. If you have painted fingernails or acrylic nails, then you have to wear gloves. That's the only time you have to wear gloves in case any of that falls off or comes off into the food itself while you're doing the preparation. So just keep that in mind. Hair restraints are required for food prep, not for food service. So once the food's made and you're taking it to the classrooms, you don't have to wear a hair restraint after that. But a hair restraint classifies as a hairnet, a baseball cap, a full bandana, anything that really is going to cover most of your head. So not just a ponytail and hairspray. That's not going to cut it. All right, so ice machines. If you have an ice machine in your kitchen there, please know that this is a food contact surface. Ice is a food. We put it in our mouths, we eat it, we can put it in our drinks, but yes, we do ingest ice. So the ice bin is like a giant food container that we have to clean and maintain sanitize. A lot of the problems that I see is if you lift up the lid of the ice bin, there's a baffle, which is just like a plastic or metal wall that the ice falls down onto, and then it pushes it to the back so it comes out from that side. So that usually has thumb screws that you can just undo, and that baffle comes out, and that's what needs to be cleaned. But that also gives you access to the inside of the chute where the ice falls down from. If you don't know how to get into your ice machine or have never have it undone, you can call the maintenance and they can either show you or they can do it itself, however that kind of works out for you. But just know that this is an important thing, because a lot of times if it does not get cleaned and sanitized, it will have mold to the point of dripping down onto the ice. All right, so a lot of questions about bulk milk coming from the kitchen to the classrooms. First of all, it has to be served in the original container, so you can't pour milk into a Tupperware pitcher and take the Tupperware pitcher to the classrooms. They pour it out, and what's left comes back to the kitchen. You cannot take that milk back. You can't pour it into the gallon jug again. You can't put it in the fridge for the next day. Like once it's out of that original container, it's completely served. So just be careful on how much you're pouring into those Tupperware pitchers, like for family style, because that's served at that point. You don't get that back. Okay, so and because that goes the same with any kind of food too. If you're doing bulk food, family style, once that goes on the table for the kids, like none of that food comes back. That all gets discarded. The only things that can be saved is pre-portioned, individually wrapped items. So your little bags of chips or Lance crackers or anything like that that's still wrapped up, you can reuse those. You can keep those stashed. Food or drink sent from home must have the child's name and date that's stored in the refrigerator. Especially with beverages, that helps you know as a center that that parent dumped out what was in there last Friday, washed it, and has put something clean in there if it has that day's date on it. And a lot of times there'll be old dates on there, and if no one's really going to know, is it good, is it clean, is it fresh? Because maybe it's in the afternoon and the people that received it in the morning, verbally confirmed, but that's not what's written on the beverage. So just make sure that those beverages have the name and date that is correct on them. And that's really the responsibility of the parent as far as the rules are concerned. I know a lot of times that falls back onto the center, but it really should be received, name and dated. So gallon milk delivered to the classrooms, there's no cut and dry on this answer because it really depends on how large your center is, how long you're leaving food there. Is there one cook? Is there two? Are they staying with the food? Are they coming back to pick it up? There's a lot of variables to this one. So just know that if you're going to leave a gallon of milk in a classroom and the teacher has washed their hands in a hand sink and is going to be pouring out that milk for the children, and then they're all going to eat it, and you're going to come back later, collect the what's left, the dirty dishes, and the what's left of the gallon milk, and you're going to put that back into the refrigerator, that milk is still 45 degrees or below. Okay, that still makes it safe. If it's up to like 47, 48, go ahead and put it back in the refrigerator because it only takes just a few minutes just to get that back down to temperature, but that's not something we want to leave out for any extended amount of time. So if you're unsure, you can do a test run, and when you go to pick up the milk, pour some extra into a glass and take your thermometer and just see what it reads. It's going to depend if it's a full gallon because that's going to hold temperature longer than if it's just a little bit left in the bottom of the gallon. So into cleaning, there's two types of ways that we can clean in the kitchen. We can do it mechanically, which is with a dishwasher or dish machine, or we can do it manually, which is in your 3-compartment sink. So if you have a mechanical cleaning method, that's either going to be one of two things. It's going to be a residential dishwasher, just means anyone that you would find in the home. And if you're using this dishwasher, you have to use it on the longest cycle. So it'll say like SaniCycle or pots and pans or anything that's the longest cycle that you have is what you have to use every time you're putting things in the dishwasher. And if you're putting things in the dishwasher, it's going to be everything that you can't. You're going to put everything in there that you can fit into it. So pots and pans, all that kind of thing, utensils, not just what the kids use for lunch. The only thing you're going to wash by hand is really if it's too large to even fit in the bottom or the top rack of the dishwasher, which should be very minimal amount. If you're using a commercial dish machine, so this is something that's got an NSF label on it, it's got a data plate, and there's usually pressure gauges. You should know what kind of equipment you have in your kitchen. So two types of commercial dish machines is either sanitizing with hot water or you're sanitizing with chemical. So if you read on the data plate, it's going to tell you one way or the other, whether it's a hot water dish machine, a chemical dish machine, or some of them can be both. So if you are using it for hot water and the booster heater breaks, you can have chemical on hand and it can now be a chemical dish machine. But you have to know what kind of equipment you have in your kitchen. So the hot water, if you're using it hot water dish machine, it's going to come out at 180 degrees. So those dials that are on there, it should read when you're rinsing at 180 degrees on your dial. If it doesn't, there could be one of two things. Either the water truly is not hot enough coming out, or your dial is off or broken. So those are things that you need to check. If your dishwasher is a chemical dish machine, you're going to have a bucket of sanitizer underneath the dish machine with a hose that brings it up, and it'll pump it into the rinse cycle. So that needs to be 50 to 200 parts per million, which is sanitizing levels, which is the same that you're making for the spray bottles for the classrooms. And you want to check this really on a regular basis. It's not every day. Maybe after it gets serviced or before or in a new bucket or just every once in a while, just to make sure that you are getting sanitizer coming in to your dishes. So what you do is you let it run, you open it up, you take your test strips and you dip it in the water that's dripping on the inside of the dish machine, and you should read 50 to 200 parts per million for chlorine. And that's how you know it's sanitizing correctly. All right, if you do not have a dish machine or a dishwasher, you want to clean manually. So you have 3 compartments to your sink, and you want to have this to flow from dirty to clean. So all the dirty dishes on one end of the tray right next to you, and the first compartment you're going to fill with warm soapy water, detergent. The second compartment you're going to put clean water in to rinse, and the third compartment is going to be your sanitizer. And then on the far end is your drain board, where you're going to let everything air dry. So important part to know that since you're doing the sanitizing by hand, you can do this the same way as a dishwasher would do that. You can sanitize by hot water, or you can sanitize by chemicals. So if you hot water sanitize, you're going to have a booster heater that goes into your third compartment sink, and you're going to set that to 170 degrees, and you have a tray that you can dip down, lower the dishes into there, because you cannot touch that, that's way too hot, and you dip those in for 1 minute, and then you bring them out to air dry. Or you can use chemical, which most people use the chlorine mix of 100 parts per million, which is 50 to 200 is fine. But you want to leave those dishes in the sanitizer for 2 minutes. They have to have contact time of 2 minutes, and then you bring them out and put them on the drain board to air dry. Now, some people do use quaternary ammonia, which is called Quats. A lot of times it's stearamine. It's in a white and blue container with the blue lid, blue little tablets. You have to mix those correctly and make sure you have the correct test strips for that, because that's a different type of chemical than chlorine itself, but it works just as fine. You have to put it in for 400 parts per million because it's a different chemical and needs a different strength, but it also needs contact time of 2 minutes. So you take that out, and then air drying is an important part of the process because the water will evaporate off there, and that's part of the sanitizer working during that part. So don't stack it wet, don't towel dry it off, just let it air dry. If you have just a 2-compartment sink, you do not have 3, okay, then you have to use single service use only. So all of your food and your beverages that you give to the children have to be in throwaway cups, throwaway utensils, throwaway plates. Okay? If you're limited to 2-compartment sink and you don't have a dishwasher, then that's what you're limited to. All right, so sanitizer. So you do have to have a spray bottle sanitizer in the kitchen, and that's for those odd things that are too big to go through the dish machine, or that it's in place, that you can spray and let air dry, and that you can completely sanitize whatever you need to have in the kitchen there. And the purpose of the test strips is to make sure that it's mixed correctly, because you can sanitize everything in the kitchen, but if it's not at the correct strength, then it's not sanitized, it's just clean. So there's a lot of chemicals that have been approved as a sanitizer, not just the chlorine bleach mix. Those MSDS sheets and the labels have to go through our office, but if it follows the EPA room and meet the requirements, then that is usually not that's not usually an issue. Several of those are being used throughout the county. The important thing is to follow the contact time. If it says it needs 10 minutes, which is what a quat ammonia needs as a disinfectant, then it needs 10 minutes. You have to do the full contact time, because what that does is, just like with the chlorine on those dishes, is it goes into the bacteria and it breaks down the cell wall, and it actually goes in there and kills the viruses. So it's actually doing work, and it needs time to do that. So let it do its job. All right, so you as a person, you are often alone in the kitchen, and you have a big responsibility as far as feeding the kids and getting snacks out and cleaning up and all of those things. But just being responsible and healthy and making good decisions. Wash hands often. Really, I mean, that's to protect yourself as well as everybody that you're serving food to. Stay at home when you're sick. If you don't feel good, maybe you can do just, the mopping and have somebody else kind of handling the food for you, but just make good decisions as far as what you can and can't do when you're not feeling well. Clean appearance. The only time you have to wear gloves is if you have maybe a bandage on your hand, or painted or acrylic nails. But if you've got a sore or an open wound, then you want to bandage that and wear gloves, but making sure that you still wash it as much of your hand as you can, even if you've got a bandage on. And no animals in the kitchen, even if they are allowed in the center. They cannot come into the kitchen portion. You can smoke only outside. And any volunteers or substitutes or parents or helpers or whatever that's coming in, they are required to follow the same guidelines as you. And they're not going to have all of your knowledge, but you need to instruct somebody or leave very clear instructions of how to work with food in the kitchen, and how to hand wash, and how to clean, and how to sanitize. Those are important things for at least a second person to know how to do. Okay. Any kind of insect activity, mouse or roaches, please deal with this immediately. They do not go away by themselves. So if you see something, let them know so you can trap, or you can have a pest control operator come out and treat and take care of that problem as soon as possible. That's not something we need to let go. So anytime there is a incident in the center, in the kitchen, fire, flood, whatever that may be, power outage for any length of time, which I would expect anything over a half-hour power outage, we're going to need to come and just make sure that the food is still safe, as far as the temperatures in the refrigerator, and depending on what time of day it is, just getting guidance from that. That's going to need to be approved, because we will come out there, take a look at the situation, and we will do some documentation just to say what the issue was, how it was resolved, what the status of the food was, and whether or not it's safe enough to use. And that's a good thing for you as a center, because parents are going to want to know, and oftentimes they call the health department to find out, because maybe they've heard rumors or they got some misinformation, and we can have it on file of the appropriate actions that you took. Okay. Taking out the trash food daily, wash it in the dump sink there, in the can wash. And if you have a dumpster, just make sure there's a plug on the side. It's at the very bottom of the bag, and it's just a little hole. And there's a big square thumb screw that goes in there, and that just keeps the rats from going in your dumpster and creating problems. So just make sure that that's in there. If you don't have one, your service provider can get one for you. So equipment, look around your kitchen, know what you have. Do you have commercial? Do you have residential? Is it old? Is it used? What do you know about it? Just being aware of what you have that you are working with. Residential refrigerators, perfectly fine in the daycare rules, but they are limited to certain things. They cannot prepare the food for the next day. So you can't make everything up and then have it sit there and then just come in and warm it up the next day. You have to make it fresh if you've got just residential refrigeration. You cannot mix, which is to make chicken salad, tuna salad, anything kind of egg or meat into a salad. You cannot mix. You can buy it already packaged, already portioned, already mixed up and serve it, but you cannot mix it from scratch yourself. Okay? You cannot heat food, cool food, and then reheat food again. Okay, so if you want to heat food, and the rest can go home with staff or with somebody else or get thrown out, but then we cannot reheat that for the next day. Now, one nuance with that is if you open a big can of green beans and you pour half of it into the pot to heat for that day, you can take the half that you have not heated and put it in the refrigerator to be used, or into the freezer and mark it to be used, because it's not gone through that heating process and cooling process. Okay, so that's a different scenario. Make sure all your equipment is in good repair and easily cleanable. So it's not chipped, broken, crevices where you can't get in there and clean. Make sure on the cutting board, when you're cutting, you're going to make gouges in that cutting board itself. So if there's a lot of black lines, that is mold growing in those cut lines on your cutting board. So it either needs to be replaced, or you can sand it down and start again with a smooth surface, but just being aware of that. If you're using single surface at all, so throwaway spoons is what I see a lot of, that cannot go in the dishwasher or through the 3-compartment sink to be washed and used again. Those have to be thrown out every single time. And that includes pie pans as well. You can use those for art, but you cannot use those for food service multiple times. Any kind of open windows requires screens on them, and the room must be bright enough to see. During plan review, there's going to be a requirement for how bright the room has to be, and there's a light meter that can be measured. But just know that if any of your light bulbs go out, you have to replace them, because you have to, if there's any room that needs to see to clean, it's the kitchen. All right, hot water heater. Sometimes you don't think of this as equipment for your kitchen, but it's an important piece. It provides hot water for you to clean in your kitchen and to cook with as well. So just know where yours is. At the sink, it should be at least 120 degrees. If it ever goes out, you do need approval from the health department to be replaced. So we make sure that it's the proper capacity and gallons and recovery rate and all of that is adequate for what you need at your center. If you're also doing laundry as a cook, just make sure that you're keeping the dirty and clean separate, and log the hazards if they're stored there. And that's a good place that we see a lot of mice coming up, because through the utility for the drains, the washer and the dryer, that's a good place for them to come in, and the dryer is usually warm, so they like it in there. So as a food service worker, just making good decisions about your food. Just take a look at it from some fresh eyes, and just kind of open your refrigerator and see, how am I storing? How are these arranged? How about my dry storage? Let's look at where I'm putting my clean utensils. Let's look at how I'm processing from dirty to clean, and just getting a good feel of your kitchen too. And just know that you can impact everyone in the center: children, staff, visitors, parents, all those. It's very important. So just wash your hands is the best thing I can say. When I do an inspection and someone's in the kitchen, I expect to see at least at some point some kind of hand washing, because I'm going to be in there long enough that we've gone through several different processes or steps, or you've gone out of the kitchen and coming back in. So just making sure you wash your hands properly, and that's going to protect everybody. So that's the gist of all of the things that are related to the kitchen as far as sanitation inspection. You know, a lot of these are kind of specific to what you have going on, what you're serving, but just write any kind of notes down or questions down, and you can email me or call me, or I'd be glad to come out and meet with you, or ask me during the inspection. If you ask me a question and you're doing something not right, I do not take demerits for things that you verbally tell me that you're not doing right. Well, let's correct this thing together and just kind of work out a way that you're compliant with the rules, but also works for your center and how you go about preparing and serving your food. So please feel free to contact me at any time, and I'll be glad to help you out any way I can. Thanks.